welcome to The Quiet Corner. This is a knitting and spinning podcast where I hope to share my love for all things fiber from my little corner of the world. My name's Vanessa and I'm coming to you from Ottawa, Canada, where I live with my husband Daniel and our adopted bunny Bo, who you will probably hear hopping around every once in a while. I also have notes with me so that I don't forget what I'm doing, and I'm going to do my best to look directly at the camera. I am not used to doing this, so I hope that this channel will be a place where I can really share my interests and have an outlet to talk about my knitting and spinning to someone who wants to listen for a really long time. And in terms of my particular kind of knitting and spinning interests, I really enjoy working with natural and rustic type fibers, but you will also see commercial yarns on this channel. I do like to knit with kind of really hard wearing, budget friendly sock yarns, so you'll probably see a mix of things on here. And just in terms of how often I will post on here, I'm going to try to post about once every month. I do have a fairly minimalist approach to my yarn stash, which I know is a bit unusual for a lot of spinners and knitters, but I just try as much as I can to use up what I have before I bring more things into my home, and partly that's also because I don't have a ton of space to store it all, so it stresses me out if there's too much yarn coming into the house. I know that probably sounds crazy, but because of that I probably won't have a ton of acquisitions to share on a regular basis, but I always have works in progress. I always have FOs to share, well, usually, and so I think on a monthly basis that would work out well for me. So I think that's about all I have to say in terms of the intro to this channel. One last thing though is just in terms of the format. I'm hoping to follow a somewhat typical format for a knitting podcast, so I'll probably begin with FOs and then go into my works in progress, and after works in progress I'll probably talk about kind of acquisitions or things from my stash that I'm planning to use and how I'm planning to use them. And then at the very end I am going to have a segment just for spinning. So hopefully you enjoy this space and this time. Okay, so one other thing I forgot to mention before we jump into FOs was just the kind of reasoning behind the name of this podcast. I've called it The Quiet Corner because I think that says a lot about me. I really enjoy the quiet moments in life, and especially if they're quiet, creative moments. Those are kind of the times in life where I recharge my battery. So, and of course there are many other ways that I recharge time spent with my husband and family and our bunny and our friends. We're really surrounded by a great community here in Ottawa, so that's really lovely too. I guess to begin with FOs, I don't have a ton to share. I'm just going to take a little tea break here. What I will share though are kind of my most recent finished objects. I wasn't quite sure where to start with the first episode. Maybe I'll start with what I'm wearing. So this is actually the Linus Shawl. I'll see if I can take it off to show you. This is a really simple free pattern on Ravelry. Of course I'm getting a tickle right now. So this is a free pattern off of Ravelry. I can't remember the designer for this shawl, but I will try to do show notes for this podcast, so that you can find everything I mentioned down below. But yeah, so this is the Linus Shawl, and I actually knit it with some of my very first hand spun. So that was a bit of an adventure. I learned to spin only recently. I started spinning last spring, and I learned to spin originally worsted style, with like a short forward draw and really controlling how much air and loft is in my yarn. But then the funny thing was that after knitting with it, I found that, I mean, it's soft in the sense that it's not prickly, but it has a really kind of rustic, hard-wearing feel to it, which is almost a little too rustic to wear around the neck, I would say. But I still really love it, and the nice thing about it is that it has a lot of structure to it, which is perfect for kind of our Canadian winters, when you need something that will kind of sit up around your face to protect your face from the wind. Yeah, I find it's really lovely that way. I'm gonna try to get this back on. So it's a super simple pattern, and I have knit 2 now, and I would highly recommend it for knitting with hand spun, because you can bind off at any point, so you don't have to necessarily know how much yardage you have, and it's tons and tons of garter stitch, which is really enjoyable and rhythmic, and something I can knit in the dark while we're watching a movie or something. So yeah, this is my Linus Shawl with hand spun. Another recent finished object, I knit a pair of socks for Dan. I don't have sock blockers yet, so it's kind of like, this is not the prettiest way to display this sock, but yeah, so they're just a simple, fairly vanilla sock. Other than that, I put about 3 inches of ribbing on the bottom, right where the arch of the foot is, just to try out what that would be like with some kind of foot shaping, if it would like hug his foot better. In the end, I don't think it's like absolutely necessary, but I think I was just getting bored and decided to do some ribbing. I don't know. But anyway, they turned out quite well. I knit these out of Debbie Bliss Rialto Luxury sock yarn. I would not knit socks out of that yarn again. It's yarn that was from my stash, and I really thought that Dan would enjoy the colors, and I really enjoy the colors actually, but the yarn itself is actually a single, and it's very kind of a very fluffy yarn, so I found it tricky because I was getting a lot of split stitches. It just wasn't knitting up as quickly as the typical sock yarn I would use. Yeah, so I wouldn't use it again, at least not for socks. But I am quite happy with how they turned out, and I knit them using my own vanilla sock pattern, which is not published. I've essentially written it for myself with the thinking that I might in the future publish it when I'm really happy with it, when I've used it tons and I know all the ins and outs of the pattern. So I've kind of been test knitting it myself for a long time. But yeah, I basically wrote it up as a reference for myself, and in the future I might consider publishing it. But the way I knit my socks is basically just toe up 2 at a time, magic loop, using a Turkish cast on. And then when I get to the heel, I turn the heels with German short rows. And then I do 2x2 ribbing, usually about 1.5 to 2 inches of 2x2 ribbing. And then I bind off using, I think it's called Jenny's Super Simple Stretchy Bind Off or something like that. It is super simple and it works wonderfully for socks. So yeah, so that's my latest sock FO. I am kind of obsessed with sock knitting, and so I always have a pair of socks on the needles, or I try to. Okay, the last FO. This is, I'm not sure if I can get this fully in the frame here, but this is the Guthrie Sweater. Yeah, so this is the first adult size all over colorwork sweater that I've ever knit, and I knit it from some stash that I purchased, yarn that I purchased kind of before I knew what I really loved to work with. It's a pretty budget friendly yarn. It's, I think, called Elan Yarns. It's a Canadian yarn company, and it's 100% Australian wool. And I just bought like a budget pack of different colors that were already they already worked well together. and I thought, well, that would be easy for my first all over colorwork sweater. So I mean, I'm quite happy with it. There are definitely some things that I'm not happy with. I have some floats in here that are way too tight, which makes the fit of the sweater a bit uncomfortable in some ways. But overall, I'm pretty happy. And I will also note that this is the most adventurous I've ever been in terms of colors with knitting for myself. I never go for pinks. I would definitely go for browns and like this sandy color, maybe copper here and there. But yeah, this is pretty adventurous for me. But I just wanted something fun to try out my first all over colorwork sweater, and something that felt really kind of harvest themed, so that I could wear it on hikes next fall. Yeah, so that is my finished Guthrie sweater. All right, so next step is works in progress. I'm going to try to keep an eye on my notes here so that I don't forget all the details. But this could also be called the What's in My Basket segment, because this is the basket that I keep all of my works in progress in. It's just nice to be able to kind of carry it anywhere in the house that I need it. So in terms of works in progress, I've really been trying to focus on knitting through some stash before I cast on any new garments. So I'm knitting and planning to knit a few smaller projects to kind of use up stash. That's kind of my focus for the month of February. So there's not a ton to show you. Like I said previously, I always have a pair of socks on the needles. I really, really love knitting socks, and they're just so portable. So what I have here, I just started these this week and haven't had a whole lot of time to knit on them because I've been focusing on other projects. But I have almost a completed toe for both. And these I'm knitting for a good friend of mine. I don't know if you can kind of see the colors there. Maybe. But this is just Patton's Croy sock yarn. It's a wool and nylon or polyamide blend, I think. And it's one of my favorite sock yarns to knit with. I really like the fabric that it gives, and it makes a pretty sturdy sock as well. And I can't quite recall which color this is. Camo colors. Yeah, camo colors. And it does have a lot of kind of greens and browns and blues and like a sandy cream color. And the friend that I'm knitting for actually chose this yarn out of my little sock yarn stash. I think she really likes the kind of earth tones, and I do as well, so I'm really excited to knit on these some more soon. hopefully I will make some significant progress before I record next. So the next thing that I have on my needles and like I said, I'm doing kind of I'm trying to do a bunch of smaller projects to use up stash that I have in smaller quantities. But this project actually isn't really stash. I've acquired this fairly recently from a dear friend of mine who went to Iceland. I think Iceland, yes. And she thought of me while she was there and decided to pick up 2 wonderful balls of the Icelandic Lopi yarn, and this is in their like the chunky weight. It's, I don't know how to pronounce this, Alefos Lopi. Let's see if I can show you there. It's super rustic and lovely, and I can tell that it's just going to be, it's going to create such a warm fabric. And I love the tweed effect that's going on here. So I am knitting this up into a pair of really chunky mittens. And my idea, I just cast on the cuffs, knitting them 2 at a time. But my idea with these is that they'll be a bit oversized. I'm knitting, I'm knitting a larger size than I normally would. And I'm using it is the Tin Can Knits, the simplest mitten pattern, the world's simplest mittens. So I'm using that pattern, and I'm knitting a medium size, but because the yarn is so chunky, I think I'm gonna get a nice oversized mitten. I'm hoping anyway, because the idea is that I'll be able to slide a thinner mitten inside and have like a double mitten, some double mitten action going on for the colder days here in Ottawa. Although lately the weather's been really weird and we've had some very mild weather days, but today seems to be quite cold. I think it's like minus 23 or 24, and I definitely should be able to get some wear out of these if I finish them soon, before the spring comes. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to having those. If not for this winter, maybe next winter will be colder and they'll be more useful. And that's really, those are my 2 main projects right now. But I do have lots of plans for cast-ons, which I'm going to get to in the next segment. Before I do though, a work in progress that I just recently cast on is this sock weight scrap yarn blanket. This is my own kind of invention, I guess. Well, not my own invention. Someone has come up with this idea before. I haven't seen anyone do it as a blanket yet. I don't know if that's way too ambitious, but we'll find out. So this is like the 1.5 inches of this blanket that I've knit out of sock yarn, and it's using linen stitch. Hopefully you can see. It's using linen stitch, and there's fringe at both ends. And the neat thing is, I found someone online who would use this technique with linen stitch for a scarf, and I thought maybe I could do that with a blanket if I don't get too sick of it. But basically what you do is you knit across using what's usually row 1 of linen stitch. So the one where you're slipping a stitch and then knitting a stitch and then slipping and then knitting. And then you do that all the way to the end. But then instead of turning your work and doing the second row, which is the one where you're supposed to slip a stitch and purl a stitch, slip a stitch and purl a stitch, instead of doing that, you cut your yarn, which starts to create this fringe. You slide all your stitches back down and you start from the beginning again with a new yarn, and you knit row 1 again. It's just knitting and slipping stitches all the way down. So, and then you leave a tail so that it adds fringe to this other side of it. And so you end up with linen stitch, which is one of my absolute favorite stitch patterns. But you don't have to do the purling side, which is kind of nice. So this is something I'll probably show progress on every once in a while if I make progress, and like goodness knows at this point if I'll keep up with this. I hope so. I think it'll be kind of neat. So that's it for works in progress. All right, so next up is stash acquisitions and future plans. Recent acquisitions, I guess we could start there. Oh no, maybe I'll start with stash because this ties into what I just talked about, which is knitting through my stash. So this is something I've had in my stash for a really long time. I've been just waiting to get a bunch of other things done to start working on it. But I have this Briggs & Little. Hopefully you can see that. Briggs & Little Tuffy yarn. Briggs & Little is a Canadian company based out of New Brunswick, so close to where I grew up. New Brunswick is the neighboring province to Prince Edward Island, so that kind of holds a special place in my heart to knit with this yarn. And it is it's like a worsted to bulky weight. It's pure wool with 80% pure wool with 20% nylon, and it's a 2-ply. So has a very rustic feel to it. And I've been wanting for the longest time to knit this into a little pair of like house slippers, either for myself or as a gift. And so this is what I'm planning to get on the needles as soon as I get those mittens off my needles. Yeah, and it's in this lovely denim blue. which I just really love. Next thing, in terms of a recent acquisition, I picked up 4 skeins of this Juniper Moon Farm Patagonia, which is their DK weight organic merino, and it's just lovely. I have been wanting to work with this for a really long time. My local yarn shop carries it, which is very exciting. It's really affordable. See if I have the yardage on here. 382 yards for $16.75 Canadian. That's really good in my books, and it's a very soft, as merino is. It's a very soft yarn, but you can tell it doesn't have. It's not superwash, so it still has this like straight off the sheep feeling, and I love that. And it still smells sheepy, which is also super exciting. So I bought 4 skeins of this for my next selfish knitting project, which I think will be either a simple raglan sweater or just a simple cardigan, maybe with a bit of lace work. I really like basics, but I do also really enjoy knitting lace and kind of patterns with simple intrigue. So we'll see what I find for this, but I know it's going to be either a raglan pullover or a cardigan of some sort, so stay tuned for that. And then oh, need a tea break. The second thing that I've purchased recently, I think I have 8 skeins of this Cascade 220 worsted weight yarn. It's 100% Peruvian Highland wool. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Cascade. It's a lovely yarn. And the plan for this, I might be crazy, but the plan for this is an all-over cabled sweater for my husband. So that might take me a year, but I really wanted to knit him something he would enjoy and wear and like, and so we went through a bunch of patterns together, and the plan for this yarn is to knit the Mount Auburn cardigan by Irina Anikiva. So it's the Mount Auburn cardigan by Irina Anikiva. It's a tongue twister. And it's this gorgeous all over cable cardigan, but it's a unique cable pattern. The details are just really lovely. and I'm really excited to cast that on eventually, hopefully within the next 1 or 2 months. I personally like to have like a max of 3 projects on the needles at a time, otherwise I feel like I don't make progress on any of them. So I definitely will try to work through some of my stash first, the mittens and the slipper projects, before I cast on these 2 sweaters. But yeah, that's the plan for the Cascade. And I think one thing I didn't mention was, well, the Cascade obviously is in their light gray color. I can't remember the exact name of the color that they use, but I'll try to post that in the show notes. But the color I'm using for the Patagonia is violet. Yeah, it's the violet colorway. So I think that's all I have in terms of knitting acquisitions and future plans. And I'm really excited about all 3 of those upcoming projects. Right, so finally, for the final segment, I want to chat about spinning related goodies. I have them in this basket right now. So what do we have here? I guess I will start with what I've recently finished. So I recently made myself a blending board, which was an adventure, but I did manage to make a blending board. And I had purchased just like 50 grams worth of a few different colors that I wanted to play around with in the Ashford Corriedale fiber. And I blended up a few, I think this was about 100 grams, I think. You can tell I'm not very exact or detailed with my spinning. But yeah, I spun this up, I blended it and spun this up from Rolex. And it's just got some really beautiful kind of indigo blue and it's like a violet purple with almost like a touch of neon purple, which I wouldn't normally be drawn to, but blended with gray gave it this really kind of subtle effect. And I spun this woolen spun. Well, obviously because I spun from Rolex, it's a woolen preparation, so it's a lot loftier and airier than some of my first hand spun, which I knit this Linus Shawl out of. So yeah, it's a lot softer and squishier, and I'm super happy with that. So I think the plan for this will eventually be a little cowl of some sort that I will either keep, depending on if I really feel like I need one, or I'll gift happily. So yeah, that's my latest kind of finished object, spinning wise, but then I'm going to knit with it. So and then I also have a blending project. I've got, well, I'll show you again. I've got all of these Rolegs here, And I have many more to blend up. But I'm planning to blend these into a DK weight 2-ply. Oh, and I should also mention that with this skein, this was also a 2-ply, and it's DK to worsted weight. I'm planning to spin these roll legs up DK 2-ply. I'm going to try to pay attention to, really pay attention to my drafting for consistency purposes. And I want to try to get as much yardage out of these as I can. And again, this is Ashford Corriedale that I use to blend with. The colors are very similar. The only difference is with these, I've added in like a minty green. I don't know if the camera will pick up on this, but it's like a minty green. And my plan for that yarn, once it's finished, I am planning to knit. It's called the Ballerina Wrap Top. And let me just make sure I know who has designed that. The Ballerina Wrap Top by Alexandra Tavel. I hope I'm saying that right. So it's, I think it's sleeveless. It's a sleeveless wrap that's kind of like a cropped length. It's super adorable. You should go check it out. And I was thinking that I really wanted to knit my first garment from Handspun, but I didn't want to commit to a full sweater project yet. And I thought this little wrap top, because it doesn't require as much yardage, might be the perfect thing. So I'm hoping that I will be able to spin up the right yarn for that pattern from these roll legs, because I also, you can probably tell from this channel already that I love grays and purples and blues, but nothing pastel-y. I like the kind of deeper purples and blues. I do like a range of, I don't like pastel-y or neon colors. But I figure that this fiber will blend up nicely with the gray to be more subtle. So next, in terms of spinning acquisitions, yeah, so I purchased about 100 grams, it is 100 grams of Rambouillet. I think that's how you say it, Rambouillet. It's Canadian rustic roving. I got it from the Fiber Garden, which is a fiber shop that's, I think, based out of somewhere in Ontario. But yeah, so this is Canadian wool, and it's just like, it's so soft and so fine, and I'm really excited to spin it up. But my plan for this, and this ties into the other acquisition I want to show you, this is a book on botanical like natural yarn and wool dyeing. This is called The Botanical Color at Your Fingertips by Rebecca Desnos. And I have been saving some foodstuffs to do some natural dyeing. And I've kind of been looking at different different materials in that book that I can use to get different colors. So my plan is actually to dye this as raw fiber and then spin it. Currently my freezer is full of avocado pits, so I might try out the kind of salmon-y color that avocado pits have to offer. Again, it wouldn't necessarily be my first color choice for me, but I might be able to also, I'm thinking, blend it with another fiber to kind of tone down the salmon color a bit. I don't know, we'll see. The other thing I would like to try is dyeing with black turtle beans, because it gives like a beautiful kind of purpley grayish blue, depending, I think, on the fiber and how you've prepared it, which kind of mordants you've used. But anyway, I think this will be an experiment. That will be really fun. Yeah, so I think that is all I have for spinning, which will essentially conclude this first podcast. I definitely hope that you've enjoyed this and that you'll consider coming back. If so, you can like the video and subscribe. And yeah, I look forward to continuing to share what I'm working on with you. So thanks for watching.